and had 7 great conversations.
Excellent.
And then want me on the board in the neighborhood now. So I'm
Well,
gonna take it over.
Why wouldn't you?
Exactly.
If you're getting good feedback like that, take what you can get for sure.
All right, let me go get you a new keyboard.
They were wanting, they were talking about vendors as well. Because I used.
Sarah, I may have gotten it.
Okay. I used one of the scripts, I guess you can say, about how realtors know a lot of vendors for home maintenance. And the light bulb just kind of came on with them, and they're like, well, we're trying to come up with a list for our neighborhood for those kind of services. And I'm like, well, I have this app.
I'm gonna say there's an app to that, and the new command and all that stuff is going to incorporate that as well. So it's you'll be able to put that in there.
I'm they kind of know I'm somewhat new, but they were excited to have me. Got it?
Thank you. Oh, you guys did a good contract decision. Take that one there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Plus, I think I maybe took this one a little early.
Well, this is why it never hurts to take more at once.
I think I was maybe.
Molly, what's your story? You brand new, or you waiting on license?
I am.
Okay. I figured since you had to write your name in, that was probably the case that we didn't have an active yet. Do you know what the status of it is or anything?
I haven't heard anything back now. I signed about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So.
And are you going to be on your own, or are you going to be on a team?
I'm going to be on my own.
Okay. Excellent. Well, some of this may or may not make sense. If I go too fast or something, slow me down.
That's okay. Thank you. I'll probably come back again if I can. So, as much as I can.
I feel like this was a little faster the last time, Sarah, but I still don't feel like it's 100%. Did you get? I closed the wrong one. Did you get somebody to look at these?
I did.
Or at the computer? Because I felt like it was a little faster, but
it does. It's a little faster, but it still needs work.
no, that one does this. No, I don't need in my own and not admin though. Skin listing glass.
So if we create an address and dot loop, I don't know, like put my address in there and just put test after it, we can play around with it as much as we want.
Because you can always archive it when you're done with it.
Okay.
And there would be no reason to submit it for review. But if you're playing around with it and you want it reviewed, submit it to me and ask me to do that, and I'll review it.
Okay.
So if you want to go in and just, have whomever in the household say, I'm going to sell you a house, and we're going to fill out this contract, and then you can send it to me, and I will be glad to look it over.
Okay. I'm normally one of those that have to experience something, and
that's fine. And same thing with the listing. If you want to list your house and send it to me, I will tell you if it's wrong or right. Okay, what do we want? Residential real estate contract. It should be down here. So.
It's right there up towards the top. 4th down. There you go. One down.
Doesn't start residential anymore, so I get confused. All right, we'll give Nick a second to get off this phone call, and I'm going to set this back in the window for a minute. I turned it off and turned it back on. So
oh, good.
Just for future reference. Apparently that's the first drink I've had since the ice melted. And Nick is brand new as well?
Yeah, I don't think Nick's done a contract on his own yet.
Okay. And we're all working independent, right? You're not going on team, you're working independent? Okay. How's the sphere list coming?
It's coming. I've got several great things happening with my, well, it's probably just faster to say this. I'm going door knocking with these.
How is your people that you know sphere list coming?
They said that so far no referrals, and they think it's great. I'm in real estate.
How much are you adding to the people that you know every day?
You mean by how much?
Well, how much you're new enough in the business that I guarantee you there are 100 more people that you could add to your have-met sphere list that you haven't thought about.
I do find that as I run across them, and I've been adding them.
What I would encourage you to do is take 30 minutes and go back through your last year's calendar, whether that's on your phone or whether it's on paper, and look at the places that you've been and went. Because some of that's going to trigger, oh, the PTA, why didn't I think about so and so?
Right.
And it will help jog your memory. I used to have, and I'll see if I still get it.
Well, now that, school's back in.
I used to have, and you may even Google this, there used to be a thing called the memory jogger for contacts. And it was like a 3-page list of church, school, swim team. It had all of those activities that you may have possibly done and not thought about those people. You know, like, where did you go 4th of July? Was it your house? Was it people you didn't know? Well, if you're invited to their house, then they could probably be on that have-met list and you start making those calls.
So I have one question, and you would probably definitely want to answer. Is that, okay, so there's a fundraiser that's going to be at each high school's football game.
Okay.
And I want to do for Readings Fundamentals, they need banners. So I offered to make the banners and sponsor the banners if I put my logo on it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do like a giveaway? Like, hey, here's a $50 gift card for dinner, put your name, and we'll do a drawing at the end. Is that legal?
It's a really, really fine line because you've essentially got to offer everyone the same opportunity to be able to be in that award. And the fine line would be people would have to give you information to do that versus just walking by and filling out a ticket and dropping it in. So it's a really fine line. Yes, I think you could do that. I would like to talk to you more private and or with Jim just to make sure. I think you're okay on that based on what you're telling me because you're actually sponsoring. You're there for a reason. It's not just like you're out there saying, give me your number and I'll put you in a drawing. You're there for a reason. So I think that we can get past that, but
we can talk
I don't want you to get in trouble first thing. So.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you can't make cookies and have people coming up and saying, okay, now you got to do this. So or you can't advertise it. And I think if you don't advertise it, it's fine. If they happen to come by your booth when you're there and you fill it out, I think you're okay at that point. You can't advertise that if you come by my booth, you can sign up for a $50 gift certificate. Then that's enticement. Okay? All right. Let's roll this. Residential real estate contract. So we've taken our buyer out. Our buyer's looked at a house, our buyer likes the house, we want to make an offer. This is the form we use. You're going to fill in the buyer's information here. This contract does not have a seller's name on here. If by chance you were dealing with what I would like to call a more old school real estate purchaser that says, well, how do we know who I'm submitting this offer to? Well, we're putting the address down here, which is kind of a giveaway. But if they want and absolutely insist on having the seller's name on it, you can come all the way down to the last page, and you can write the seller's name right here. Friendly broker advice is I'm going to encourage you not to do that. Because if the listing says Don Klepper on it as the seller, and you write in Don Klepper, and oh yeah, by the way, I'm married, so the seller is actually Don and Brandy Klepper, now we've got to go back and amend some of this contract. So I'd rather you not put that in there. I'd rather the seller write that in there themselves, because they know who's actually going to be the one selling the property. So, but if you've got, like I said, that real hard-nosed person that wants to have the seller's name on the contract, they can do that. Legally, we don't have to because we're just extending an offer for purchase to this address. So, buyer's name, address, city, zip code, county. Municipality, don't worry about it because we're not in Kansas City or St. Louis and we don't really have to deal with that. I think there's one maybe in Branson West somewhere, but I don't think you guys are going to run into that, and I don't really think it's going to be an issue even if you are dealing with one around here. Legal description, check box if attached. This contract is great because it actually says, if no legal description is attached, then legal description on seller's vesting deed to govern. So if we don't provide one, whatever the title company provides to us is what actually we're going to use. If you do want to include one, and I think that's fine, I don't necessarily encourage you or discourage you to do it, but I would just tell you to print out the tax record and just write legal description across the top of it and have everybody initial it. Does that make sense? That will officially attach it to the contract, but you need to have everybody initial anything that we're attaching to it. And I want you to write, again, legal description across the top of that tax record or survey or whatever you use. So we've identified it as what we're attaching. Inclusions and exclusions. These are great. This is essentially telling the seller what we expect to be in the property when we close on it. The things that you need to watch for are right here in the middle, propane tanks. So if you're dealing with more of a rural property, it's got a propane tank, you need to find out if that propane tank is owned or leased. Because if it's leased, it is not conveyed with the property. And hopefully the agent has done their job on the listing and has indicated that it doesn't go with the property, but I would verify that. Because it even says down here under on line 18 and 19, excluded, rented, leased, not owned by the seller, such as propane tanks and water softeners. So anything that they're leasing, and I would check on the alarm system too if there is one. Most people are going to own that equipment, but there are still some systems where they brought in the equipment and it's actually being leased. So any of those things you need to check, but all of these things are expected to be in the property. If there are other things that you want in the property, the refrigerator, the TVs, the electronics, or whatever, you can go ahead and put them in here on line 17. There is a chance that the lender is going to require us later to take those out of there, because lenders do not like it when we convey real property or personal property with the real property. So if we have to cross that bridge later on, we can take it out and show it as no value. But I would always include it in your offer because we all want to be on the same page with what we expect for this sales price. You know, for the offer price I'm offering you, I expect the TV and the refrigerator and the washing machines. Just so we're clear on that. If we have to take it out later, we can. Excluded items. You know, my kids are 10 and 14. I don't really need that playset in the background. And I really don't want to take it down as soon as I move. I want that playset excluded. I want it gone before we close on the property. So you can put that in here. You can also list any of those items if you need to. We'll get to this in a minute, but I'll just show you. Under the special agreement section, so you can write things in here if you need to. If you have a laundry list of items, I think we're probably more under exclusions. You know, we've got a bunch of debris that's got to be removed, stuff in the attic, stuff in the crawl space, and you don't have enough room to write it here, you could write C Exhibit A, and then you can go type it on a separate piece of paper, write Exhibit A across the top, and have everybody initial it, just like we did with the tax record. Okay? So inclusions, exclusions go there. Next section, purchase price, earnest money. Pretty straightforward section. How much are we going to offer for the property? How much do we want the seller to help us pay for our closing costs? And how much earnest money are we or are we not putting down? I get the question, what's the usual amount for earnest money? What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? This is not necessarily broker advice. This is what I do. I never offer it unless it's asked for. Unless I really, really think it's going to help my offer. Because earnest money is a hairy animal when things go bad. And it just gets, then we got people fighting, and then it goes to the state, and then nobody gets it back. So I always tell my buyer, if they ask for it, well, we're going to absolutely offer it. But we're not going to offer it up just for the sake of saying you can have $500 of our money. Unless, and again, caveat on that is, if we've got a property where I know we're going to have multiple offers, and I've got to make mine look as good as possible, then I may go ahead and say, let's put a little earnest money down. Maybe $100, maybe not 500 or 1,000, but maybe a little bit. Hi, Deb. Thanks, bud. I don't think I need him, but I appreciate it.
I just saw him out there. I figured that was yours.
So that's really between you and your client. It's if you offer it, it's fine. If you don't, I also think it's fine. If you receive the earnest money at the time of the contract, it states right here, you check this box, has been provided, and then you come all the way back here to the very bottom of the contract. Who's received it? You've received it, your license number and date. And then you're going to take that earnest money check and you're going to get on the other .loops forms and find the earnest money receipt. And you're going to take that receipt with a copy, or that copy of the check, to title company, wherever it is, and they're going to sign off on it. That way that earnest money is out of your hands. I want a paper trail showing it going from the client to the title company and not being held by you guys, because that's when we get in trouble too. So if you get it, go ahead and sign it. If you don't get it, then it states it's got to be deposited within 10 days to this, whomever this is. Now line 28, line 36, both default to section 6. It says in here section 6 right here. Title company identified in section 6 unless notified otherwise. So 28 and 36 are really redundant, but at the same rate, I would tell you guys to go ahead and fill those in, just so it's clear to everybody. Earnest money's here, we're closing here, and then we get to the title in section 6, and it'll be there again. So you don't have to fill these in, because again, they default to section 6. I'm going to tell you to go ahead and do it, just because it clarifies everything.
And that's the title company?
Mm-hmm. That's whoever's holding your earnest money, which in most instances is going to be the title company, unless you're like writing it to Murney or something. We do not have an earnest money account at Keller Williams. And for good reason, because it's a big hairy animal as well. So the title companies, most of them don't have any problem holding your earnest money. If you change title companies, most of them will transfer it to the other title company for you without too much trouble.
So that's who we're calling the escrow agent then?
Say again?
That's who
Yes,
we're calling, okay.
correct.
The word agent always makes us think.
Oh yes, correct. Escrow agents, whoever's actually holding that money.
Makes sense.
So yeah, Murney has their own account, so they actually act as their own escrow agents. They're not a title company. It's whoever's holding that money. So in most instances, again, all of these are going to be the same. But if you're writing it to Murney for whatever reason, it would be Murney here, and then you have title company down here.
Okay.
And I do like this part of this closing company, because you can specify which Great American Title or which Hogan that we're actually closing at, versus it being in the past when we were all just kind of, we had to verify which location we were going to. So 10 days on earnest money, it's got to be there, it's got to be received. Closing date, whatever you're going to do there. Standard, I hate to say standard. If you're doing a cash deal, in most instances, you can get it done in 30 days. If you're doing a finance deal, in most instances, you can get it done in 45. Ask the lender to make sure you're still in the time frame, but in broad brush strokes, those are kind of time frames that you can utilize. Again, we're going to do to this closing company, possession and all keys to be delivered to buyer at closing. So this does not allow for, if you happen to be representing the seller, this is a conversation you need to make sure you have. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we are scheduled to close on this day, and we'll have a time set, obviously. At whatever time we write our name on that piece of paper, we are expected to turn over keys with a broom clean condition property, all of our furniture out of it, all the inclusions in the property, and all the exclusions gone. It's not we're closing at 11, but the moving trucks are still there. We'll get you the keys at 5. No, when I write my name and hand you a big fat check for your house, I get the keys and don't have to see you anymore. So make sure that's clear. And that's the expectations you should set for your buyer. And then if something goes south, that's when you call me and we have a different conversation with the other agent. Okay?
So in that situation, what is our job? Are you saying we don't need to tell the seller or the listing agent that? They should know that too.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm just saying, if you happen to be the listing agent receiving a contract, you need to make sure you communicate to your client that the expectation of the buyer is that we have keys, the house is clean, and we're gone. Okay? All right. Financing and appraisal. The financing and the appraisal both have a default time period of 25 days, which truly is probably enough time to get things done. That being said, once those time frames are passed, you can't get out of the contract based on those two items. So what we are advising you to do, and actually what they taught us at the board to teach you to do, is this time period and this time period should mirror your closing time period. So if you've got a 45-day closing, I want those time periods to be 45 days. Because here's what happens if we've got a conventional loan with a 25-day financing period. Everything goes great. You know, we've been approved for our loan. Everybody's sailing high. We've gone through the inspection period. Everything's great. And we get 4 days before and it hits underwriting. Underwriting says, no, we can't do this for whatever reason. Well, guess what? You're past your 25 days. So you don't have a, quote, get out of jail free card anymore because it's not contingent upon financing. Your financing contingency expired at that point. So another key thing to keep in mind about these two time periods is if we've got let's say we've got a 45-day closing period and we set both of these time periods to 45 days. And for whatever reason, we have to push the closing back 2 weeks. Especially if it's anything to do with financing, I want you to extend those two time periods. Most specifically the financing. The appraisal should be done and over with at that point, so it shouldn't be an issue. But specifically the financing time period, because if it is contingent upon financing, we have to extend for 2 weeks. Your person happens to have gone and financed a new vehicle that we didn't know about, and it gets to underwriting and they can't close on the house, at least we've got a way we can get them out. Sorry, my client was really stupid and they went and bought a car. It's happened. You laugh, it's happened, because they're all excited because they're going to get, their closing costs were less than they thought, and yeah. Okay, so we got an appraisal that can be done. Bank's going to do that. I'm also going to tell you, a lot of the lenders right now are kind of dragging their feet, waiting on inspections to be done before they go send out the appraiser. Their job is to send that appraiser out as soon as we sign the paperwork with them. Don't be shy, be firm with your lenders and tell them I want the appraisal done. Now, a lot of them are dragging their feet because it does cost your client money if they go do the appraisal. So keep that in mind, but don't be afraid to tell them, we need this information back, please go get it, please get it set up and get it done. So we go out and do our appraisal and it comes back, we've got a $100,000 offer on the house, appraisal comes back at 90. We got a problem because it's not appraising for what it did, and we've checked this box that said it has to appraise at or above sales price. Well, then we've got, by default, 5 days to come to an agreement about what's going to be done with that. Are we lowering the sales price? Is the seller going to give us some kind of concession? What's going to happen? That 5 days doesn't bother me a bit, because if we can't get on the same page in 5 days, we're not going to get on the same page. So I think that time period is okay, but that's what that means, is if we get an appraisal back and it doesn't appraise, and we've got that box checked, so always check that box, that means we've got a 5-day period to try to figure out what's going on, or our buyer gets out and gets their earnest money back. Okay? So appraisal all goes well, everything's good, we've agreed upon that. Now we've got 3 ways we can finance it. Not contingent upon financing, so they can do whatever they want to. They can still finance it, but it's not contingent upon them getting that finance. Non-conventional, so if you're using any kind of government loan, I also like this contract because it actually tells you specifically which government loan you should be using. I'm not going to cover those specific finance addendums today. If you have one and have questions, call me. I will tell you that none of these government loan writers have anywhere in there to provide for lender-required repairs. A lot of times, the lender's going to go in, they're going to do their appraisal, and they will say, this property will qualify for FHA if this window is painted and this leak under the sink is fixed. The way the contract and these addendums read now is that is your buyer's responsibility to come up with that money and coordinate with the seller to get those repairs done prior to closing. So if you're doing a government loan, and we'll talk about this if you call me, but if you're doing a government loan, I encourage you to write in the special agreements on the very last page, or second to last page here, seller to provide up to, I don't know, the amount doesn't really matter. I usually say $500 because if it's over that, we're probably going to have an issue anyway. Seller to provide up to $500 of lender required repairs. So then it's clear that the lender comes back and says something's wrong, that we didn't find in our inspection and negotiate otherwise, that you're going to cover up to $500 whatever the lender wants done. If it's over and above that and my buyer chooses to pay for that, that's fine. Okay? Again, that was just, sorry about the sidebar there, but that's really the only, I ran into that here recently, that somebody didn't have that written in, and it kind of bit them. So just keep that in mind if you're dealing with the government finance, that there's nothing in there that allows for the seller to pay for that.
So when you say the lender requires, is that for example, the VA loan, is that like the VA appraiser? Is that what we're talking about?
Exactly.
Okay.
He's going out and he's determined that this house is a great VA house. It qualifies for everything that my checklist says except for this window.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And therefore, if you fix this window, we'll give you this VA loan.
And then is 500 standard for that? I know there's not really a standard.
There's not really a standard. I say 500 because if it's a $3,000 repair, seller's probably not going to make it.
Okay.
Buyer probably not going to have the money.
Yeah.
If it's $500, seller can probably come up with that.
Okay.
and buyer could probably come up with 250 on their side if we had to split. I mean, if there's some negotiation, usually $500, we can get it done one way or the other.
Yeah, got it.
I just like it.
Take care of itself.
I just like that being the cutoff point personally, because then if it's over that, the seller doesn't agree to it again, I've got a way to get my clients out of this because we cannot now qualify for this VA loan.
Yeah.
Okay? So conventional, if you're doing the basic, 20% down or whatever, it talks about that you've got this amount of time, be it by 5 o'clock. Again, we're going to put 45 days in there, which is our loan contingency deadline, to determine that we can do all this. Unfortunately, we have to put things in these blanks. I personally don't like this because I don't like giving away my clients' information. However, it's here, so we've got to fill something in. So you either got to put in a percentage of a loan amount or an amount. In order not to rewrite the contract, I would tell you just to write the purchase price in there. Then we can get the loan up to that amount to get the property closed. Or whatever your client's maximum might be. Same thing, honestly, with the interest rate. The term doesn't bother me, but the interest rate. So right now, interest rates are what, 4.3, something along those lines. So if we write it at 4, that we've got to get an interest rate at 4.3 at today's rates, and this contract gets ratified on Thursday, and the Fed comes out Thursday morning and raises our rates to 5.25, now I'm out of contract because I can't fulfill the terms that I've put in here. So what I have been encouraging you guys to do is to put this interest rate higher than perhaps it is right now, but not so high that your client can't afford it. Because I don't want you to come back to another agent and say, my client can't get an acceptable interest rate on their loan, so we can't close on the property. And you've written in 5.5% there. And then I, the evil other agent, come in and say, well, I've got a lender that will do it for 5.5% right now. And that's all you have to do is you've got to get a 5.5% loan for 30 years. That's what your terms say. I can make that happen, so therefore you can't use that as your contingency. Guess what? Your client put kind of somewhere in that floating in the middle, so you've got at least a little bit of room to move if it fluctuates during our term.
So like if it was at 4.6 right now, maybe put in 5%.
Again,
Like that.
it's I don't want to fix you on a percentage. I want you to make sure that you know what 5% is going to do to your client. And 2 or 3.23, somewhere in there. You should be able to wiggle that much either way. But
and then that line above it where it's, let's see.
You got loan amounts. So you either got to put 80% or an amount in there. That would be a conventional loan.
And you said maybe to put the price of that.
I would just put the list price right here.
List price, okay.
Because my conventional loan may actually. Something may switch such that I'm able to get a 95% on, who knows, but I think you just put the max in there, yes.
Okay. And then is that a discussion you're having with your buyers? Are you saying, hey, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it? And do you work enough with them, or do you?
I would.
Okay, because I think, that seems like a nice thing.
Yeah, I absolutely would, because a lot of them aren't going to understand a lot of that.
That's what I was
and if
thinking.
you don't understand it, then make a 30-minute appointment with your client and the lender. And sit down and say, I'm afraid I'm not explaining this right to them, and I wanted to make sure they're clear before we make this offer. They'll appreciate that. You get a lot of referrals out of that.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
what kind of rate are we getting, fixed or adjustable, and any other terms? In that line on any other terms, I would encourage you to put any terms required by lender. That way, the seller has agreed to any terms required by the lender. So that means if we've got to take the TV and the stereo and the dishwasher out of the contract, you've already agreed to satisfy any terms required by the lender. It's kind of a little bit sneaky, but at the same rate, it just gets them on the front page to say, okay, whatever the lender requires, we'll agree to. Okay? Now, that's not necessarily monetary, but any actual terms. So we've got our conventional title and survey. Look at my notes here, because I don't want to miss something here. Okay, let me back up real quick. So, page 1, we've got a $100,000 house, and we've asked for $2,500 on the second line for seller concessions. Skip right now with me to section 10, which is like page 7, I think. No, page 5. Seller concessions on that page 1 of the contract refers to all of this. So if the seller has agreed to this $2,500 in closing costs, they have agreed to help the buyer pay for hazard insurance premium, flood insurance premium, fees for survey, title company, lender charges, inspection, special taxes, value agreed upon repairs, municipality, any commission, whatever. So they've agreed to pay for these items. Seller is already going to be paying for these items, most likely. That's what we're getting ready to talk about. And these items right here, the parties prorate. But if this amount was $2,000, this prorated amount will still come from seller concessions. Okay? So, page 1, when your seller or buyer wants to know, okay, what does that include? You can bring them back to section 10 and it shows them exactly what that involves. So it says very specifically and italicized here on 81, any seller pay title fees set forth below are in addition to seller concessions. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this section here is in addition to this $2,500. So right now, we've got $2,500 that you're losing, so to speak, out of this deal because we've already agreed to pay for it. Historically, what I would call standard procedure at a closing is seller does the title search to verify the title is clean, buyer pays for title insurance. It's kind of the way, we're making sure our end is clean, you're covering yourself if for some reason the title company missed something. This contract allows for 4 different ways for that to happen. And it says these shall be delivered within 10 days. And honestly, I think that's probably plenty of time. You might budge that to 15 on line 84 here, but most of the time your title company is going to get that for you in 10 days without too much trouble. But again, this has 4 different ways that this can actually be paid for. Section A states that the seller is going to pay for both the title search as well as the title insurance. I could see this being used if we had a first-time home buyer of some sort that just didn't have any cash. They're going to have help with their closing costs, and hey, we can't even afford the amount to do the title insurance. We really need some help. Now, in that case, you might actually consider upping the sales price a little bit to make it more enticing to the seller to be able to pay those things. But I don't think it's actually on your paper calendar. If you're looking for me, I don't think I'm on there.
That's okay.
Sarah doesn't like me that well. She likes to assign me jobs and then not actually put me on the calendar. So it's all good.
I thought it was coaching, but I'll take another contract class.
Yeah.
So A says seller's going to pay for both of those things. B says buyer and seller are going to split that 50-50, which on paper sounds okay. However, I think it's very unlikely that my title search and my title insurance are going to be exactly the same amount. So somebody's ending up above and somebody's ending up below. So I don't see that one being used a whole lot. C is the one that you're going to use the most, and C the most, because it's the one where the seller pays for the search, buyer pays for the insurance. And then D is the one where the buyer pays for everything. So I see this as an investor that comes in and says, I'm going to offer you $96,000 on this house, but if you accept my deal, I don't want any closing costs, and I'll pay for both the search and the insurance. Okay? Again, C is the one that you're going to see most often. On page 1, I indicated line 38, and I can't remember the other one. Both defaulted to section 6. This is where they default right here to this title company. So you do need to fill that one in for sure, because that one doesn't default anywhere else. That's the one that defaults the rest of the contract, so that one must be filled in. Okay?
Can you say that one more time on line C? You used a script there. The seller pays for the title.
Seller pays for the title search. Buyer pays for the title insurance. So the seller's making sure that we're all clear up to this point, and the buyer is paying for it in case the title company happened to miss something where something wasn't properly recorded and comes in later.
Okay, perfect.
Okay? That's what the title insurance does for you, is verifies when you closed on this property, title was clean. If something clouds that title from before, we will insure that title against any previous claims. Now, if you go and don't mow the lawn and get a lien on it from the city, it doesn't cover that. But if somebody else didn't mow the lawn right at the end, maybe, and that's usually when they happen, is you've got a property that somebody's moved out of, the grass has grown up, or something's happened, the city's come in and done something, and just right as we're closing, that's when they file their lien, so maybe it gets crossed over to the new owner. Title insurance covers that because it happened before the close date. Make sense? Okay. So we're going to do this title commitment and owner's policy provided by this title company. And we've got, the buyer has 20 days, which seems excessive to me, to review this title commitment. If you've not seen a title commitment, you can read one in about 12 minutes. And that's if you read every bloody word and some of them twice. They're not that long, not that hard to read. So again, 20 days seems excessive to me unless you are planning to have a survey. Because this time period also includes inspection and receipt of that survey. So if you're doing a survey, I'm actually going to want you to extend that time period because chances of you getting a survey done in 20 days are pretty slim.
And who's requesting the survey? That would be the buyer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And in this contract too, and I can't remember exactly, let's see if I've got it underlined in my master here. I'll have to hunt it. Somewhere in here it indicates that if a seller has a previous survey, they are required to provide it to the buyer as just part of this contract. It's in this section somewhere. I have to read it all word for word. So we got 20 days to review this unless the survey's here, and any and all other recorded documents. Where is that up here? Oh, it's down here. So we got this 20 days to review this, use all this, rights of ways, easements, and any other recorded documents which may retire in the review period. So anything about that property, the lines, anything, you've got that time period to review it. So again, if you're getting a survey, I would tell you to get a longer period than that. And then down here it says, this is essentially the same time period as this, but this box only comes into play if the buyer is paying for both sides. This says the buyer's got time period to get things done, and they've got this 20-day period to review whatever they've had done. But this box at line 98 only comes into play if you check the box at line 89, which again, most often you're probably not going to have that situation. It also states in here that, okay, so we've got,
So if you have a survey, you should have a longer time.
I would encourage you to have a longer time period because you've got this is your time period, this line 96 is your time period to review anything about the property.
Okay.
Title, survey, easements, encroachments, any of that is your time period. So if we're getting a survey, that means we've got to be able to get it completed and have time to review it. And I will tell you, you won't get a survey done in 20 days.
I have 45 days.
Yes, and I think the last class,
whenever we had the contract,
I would have you, again, have it mirror the same time period as your contract if you're doing a survey.
So if no survey, just leave it.
If no survey, then I would just leave it. And again, most often you're going to have that done before 20-day time period anyway. So we've received our title commitment, and the buyer has said, nope, I'm going to reject this because of the mechanics lien filed by the city.
Liens don't go with the property then, right?
Yes. Yeah, so if it's not paid off, then your buyer is going to be responsible for it, and it will not come into play on that insurance because they were made aware of it. That insurance is only in place for things that come up that we didn't know about. So by default, we've got 7 days for the seller to determine what they're going to do about that issue. I think it's fine to leave this at 7 days because if there's a big issue that we're going to have more time, we're probably going to agree on that anyway. But they've got 7 days to determine what they're going to do about that. Yeah, we'll pay the mechanics lien, or no, we're not. And that's essentially what it will come down to. Okay, so if they choose to fix it, then they've repaired the problem on the title, we move forward. If they choose not to fix it, contract by default terminates, buyer gets their earnest money back. Except for, unless buyer within 3 by default, after buyer's receipt of seller's response to buyer's objection, agrees in writing to accept title without correction of such objections. So, let's go back and start this all over again. We've done our title search. Buyer does not like the city municipal lien that's on the property for $550 for 3 yard mowings. Seller has said, well, seller's probably gonna say, well, we're already paying $2,500 here, we've got this, we are out of money, we cannot pay that lien off, so we're just gonna have to let the contract go. Your buyer loves this house. So whether it's, they find money, grandma gives it to them, I never encourage you to give away your commission unless you guys reduce your, whatever we do to get this together, because they want this house so bad, they decided they'll pay the $550 just to get the house. They've got 3 days to come back in and do that. So, I want you to switch gears and think about the fact that you are now a listing agent. And you've got the stubborn-headed seller that will not they don't have the money to pay the $550. Contract defaults. You put, as a good agent, put the property right back on the market. You get an offer that day. You accept that night. I come back with my buyer in 3 days. I get it. Because you've already agreed to it in this original contract. So, a conversation to have with your seller is, they could come back. What you can do, if we want to terminate it, is you can come in and you can actually write terminated, canceled, and have everybody sign across this. Everybody's on the same page. This no longer is in effect. Which I would honestly encourage you to do if you're representing the seller. If you think there's any chance the buyer may come back in. Because if you work with buyers at all, and when you do, you'll understand this, they fall in love with something, sometimes logic goes right out the window. Because they're going to buy this house no matter what. I'll let you have a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, is it not sufficient to put 0 days?
You can put 0 days in there, absolutely. Yes, if it said 0 days in it, then there would be no rescission period. And that's another way to do it. And I don't know that it makes your offer look that much better, but that's certainly one of those things that Okay, so seller has refused to fix the mechanics lien. Buyer is not going to exercise this time period. But if any defect objected to causes a failure of marketable title, then seller shall be liable for any survey and title charges. Again, put your listing agent hat on and have that conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Seller. I realize that you don't have, or don't think you have $550 to pay off this mechanics lien. That's fine. We can terminate the contract. However, you are going to be responsible for the buyer's title fees and survey charges, which could ultimately end up equaling more than the $550, but depending on what your situation is. But that's a conversation to have, because if they default, if they back out, earnest money's returned, and they're responsible for any fees that they have incurred as a result of that. So, kind of not great for the seller if they're not aware of that. All right, inspections. Property being sold in its as-is condition, with everything it is, they've got their option. Seller agrees to permit inspections of the property by any qualified inspector or appraiser selected by buyer and or required by buyer's lender upon reasonable advance notice to the seller. So what does that mean? Any reasonable, we asked this question from the attorneys. What's that mean? Reasonable, what does it say? Actually, qualified inspector. What's a qualified inspector? Because in the state of Missouri, we don't have to have licenses to be an inspector. So the answer was, if someone does it for a majority of their livelihood, they can be considered qualified. So if Cousin Steve, your client's Cousin Steve builds houses for a living, Cousin Steve could probably be qualified as an inspector. He's still going to have to provide a written report as stated in here, but it could be argued that Cousin Steve has enough knowledge in these areas to be able to go in and give at least the inspection that your client wants. If Cousin Steve's an accountant, probably not. Just because he does woodworking on the weekend doesn't qualify him as an inspector. Okay? So hopefully you won't run into this. Hopefully everybody's using good people. But if when in doubt, feel free to call and we can do this determination. All right. Section B. What I affectionately refer to as the get out of jail free card. And I think most often, and I believe you're probably going to see these with 0 days in here, but I need to explain what this says. By default, your buyer has 5 days to review any additional data regarding the property, including, but not limited to, all of these following things: zoning regulations, occupancy, association bylaws, subdivision stuff, covenants, deeds, restrictions, square footage improvements, and presence of registered sex offenders. So that's just, again, a small list of all the things that they could find out that they didn't like. So, in an extreme case, we've left this blank, so my buyer has 5 days to do whatever they want to. And my buyer's cousin Mabel was attacked by a pit. And my buyers are driving through the neighborhood because they're all excited about their new house. And they saw 2 couples walking pit bulls and they want out. This says 5 days, they get out. So, as a buyer's agent, I want you doing as much of this and helping your client with as much of this as you can before, but I really want you having the conversation with your client. If you think any of these things are seriously going to concern you, I really want you finding them out before we make the offer. Because I want to make this number 0 because it makes our offer look better. Because if you submit an offer for $100,000, I submit an offer for $100,000. Mine says 5, yours says 0. Who do you think already has a leg up? Because I can't run away from this deal in the next 5 days. They've got you hooked in. I've got an opportunity to get out of here. So, again, I think most of what you're going to see, and from what I have seen and reviewed and looked at, most of what you're going to see is going to say 0 in there, just because that's kind of what, I hate to say this, our standard around here has been. But it's something you really need to be aware of, because somebody could sneak in, they can be making 4 offers in one day on multiple properties, and using this as their get out of jail free card. Okay? So it's not a bad thing, it's just you need to be really, really aware of it. Inspection reports. Buyer may, at buyer's expense, obtain written reports of condition of the property, including but not limited to flood, environmental, termite, wood destroying, roof, structural, electrical, air conditioning, all of those things. Please note this italicized here. During your inspection period, the availability of insurance must also be ascertained. That is unfortunately one thing that's often overlooked early on in the transaction, because we're all excited again about this new house. We're all kind of worried about our inspections. We're dealing with the lenders. You got to make sure we get insurance on the property during this time period as well. So, we've made our offer on the property, and we come down to section D. Buyer must complete a complete copy of the relevant inspection reports to seller, along with a written list of any unacceptable conditions, and we'll hit the inspection notice in a minute, within, by default, 10 days. I would encourage you to make this 15. Inspectors are busy, sometimes getting them in 10 days and getting the reports back and having time to review them with your client properly in 10 days is kind of a stretch. So, I would encourage you to make that 15 days. If during that 15-day period your inspector says, I'm not a roofer, but man, it looks like there's a lot of hail up there, there's some flashing loose, I really think you should get a roofer out here to look at this. By default, this contract has 5 days for a specialist. And since everyone has already signed this, the seller doesn't have to agree to it later on. They've already agreed to it as part of the contract. So honestly, I think 5 days is plenty, because if it's going to be a situation where the specialist is going to be longer, you're going to communicate that with the other agent, say, hey, they can't get out there till next Tuesday. I'll write an addendum extending our specialist report till then. And usually you won't have any pushback, because again, they've already agreed to it and they understand. Sometimes the roofers are busy and they can't get out there. So, or whomever you have to have going. So total, if we did 15 here, we'd have 20 days. Now please note, if you exercise your specialist notice time frame, you must provide a specialist report. So this can't just be oh, well, we're going to get a specialist out there. Oh, we decided not to do that. Well, that doesn't work, because your decided not to do that time expired right here. If you exercise that extra time period, you must have a specialist come in and you must provide that report, because otherwise you're just dragging your feet. Please note, you may submit only one inspection notice, and it must include all matters unacceptable to buyer and a copy of all relevant specialist inspection reports. And buyer may not object to anything that is not in an inspection or specialist report. I'm going to read that again. Buyer may not object to anything that is not in an inspection report or specialist report. This is both good, bad, and makes you guys work harder up front. So, I'm showing the property. This window is fogged up. That needs to be in the original offer that seller to repair window in living room. If you guys can see it with your eyes and it's wrong, it needs to be in your offer. Now sometimes the inspectors will put some of those items in there, but if we get an inspection report back and it doesn't include this window, you can't ask for that window. You just lost out on that opportunity. So, and I know when we're new, we get excited, and the buyers are excited, and they're asking us questions. We're doing our best to answer. Don't just go, if they really like this house, I want you to spend some time in the house, and I want you to walk through, and I want you to open every door and every cabinet, and essentially make your clients live in the house for 15 or 20 minutes. Go around and do all the stuff you would do during the day, and let me know if anything's wrong. Because if we can find it now granted, if the sink's leaking, if there's a leak under the sink, some of those things the inspector is going to put on his report anyway. But he may not notice that the cabinet door doesn't close just right, or that, I can't even, but anyway, you get my point. If you guys can see it, ask for it up front. Here, this is one. Sometimes the inspectors will include that we should have splash clocks underneath downspouts. Sometimes they miss that and don't put it on there. Put that in the original offer. Yes?
I have a question. Put an offer on a house last week.
Okay.
And, everything was pretty fine with the toilets, water, everything. Just came back after the contract, was accepted, things like that. Most of the toilets are running. They need repair. Is that the kind of thing that would
The inspector should be that. The inspector should have that report. Now, what I would encourage you to do is to tell the inspector, we believe the toilets are constantly running, so will you please pay attention the entire time you're there, so you can note in your report if they are constantly running. And my guess is he's probably going to notice that when he goes in anyway, but anything that you guys are concerned about, mechanical issues, plumbing issues, that it's not our job to know the answer to those questions, folks. Don't feel bad that we don't know the answer. But also don't feel bad about telling the inspector, hey, will you pay special attention to these couple of things just because my client's really worried about it.
So if you needed, like that window example, and you wanted to write that into the contract at the beginning.
I would put it in special agreements on page 7, yes.
Okay.
I was just kind of worried about that because everything was fine until after the contract was signed, and then 2 toilets are selling.
Yeah, and as long as you still got your inspection coming, you should be fine. So,
Yes.
and also, if we made an offer, if the inspector didn't notice it because everything was fine, and we go to our walkthrough and the toilets are running, it's more difficult to do it then, but we still have ground to stand on because that is not in the same condition that it was when we made the offer. So, same thing, there was one year that we didn't, which blew my mind. They didn't include that the range hood had to stay with the property. Clearly an attached item, mind you. But as we go for the walkthrough, okay, I guess they took the range hood. So then we have to call the other agent, like, you gotta have something put in there today. We're closing tomorrow. What do you mean? A, it's attached item. B, there was nothing in there that was an excluded item. But it was wrong. I mean, I know it's not a toilet running, but same thing. If we go into the kitchen sink stripping or whatever, I've had that many times. Like, hey, sink stripping, wasn't dripping before, I'm going to send my guy out, we'll send you the bill. $7,500, fine. And some of those things, if you've got a home warranty, if you just wait till the next day, they can claim it on the home warranty. I would rather you get it from the other agent versus exercising the home warranty, but you'll run into those things, and if you guys got questions, call myself or Jim, probably me, because Jim has to deal with all the attorneys. I pass those off to him. But yeah, call with anything. So we've got our inspection report, we've done our specialist report, and we've got 3 different ways that we can respond. Above, 3 different ways. Don't look at line 155. So everything above. So we can send back our inspection notice that we're satisfied with the inspection. We'll take the property exactly as it sits. We can respond to that there are these items that we are not satisfied with and we wish you to repair them, and we've attached the inspection reports to our inspection requests. Now we're waiting on your response. Or 3, we don't like the inspection report and we want out of this contract. Those are the 3 options that we have. Unless the box at 156 is checked. Limitation of inspection rights only applies if the following box is checked. Buyer waives its right to unilaterally terminate the contract. So, what it says is, if you check this box at 156, you've taken a big old eraser to number 3 up here. You've eliminated that option for them just to walk away from the contract. So, hopefully most of the contracts you receive will have this box checked. And I will tell you that most of the offers you should send should probably have that box checked, or you're going to get a counter offer that says buyer to have limitations of liability or limitations of responsibility. There's also one down here a little further, because I'll talk about limitations, where it's as is. I'm going to waive my inspection rights, not doing any inspection, I'm taking the property just as it says. These up here are saying I've done an inspection and here are my responses. So if we've checked this box and we've done our return, then we've filled out section essentially number 2 that says we're going to provide you with inspection notice, things that we don't like, and our inspection reports. Then by default, we both, buyer and seller, have 10 days to get on the same page about what's going to be done with all this. Again, maybe 15 days on this one. I think 10 is probably fine because I go back to the same thing before. If we can't get on the same page in 10 days, we're probably not going to get it done. And if we're fighting really hard on the 10th or 11th day, we're probably going to agree to extend this time period. So the 10 days doesn't really bother me, but it gives essentially the seller a chance to go do all of the things that if they want to go get a roofing inspector or whatever, they can go do that. And then we've got to get on the same page. So also as part of the inspection notice that I'll show you in a minute, then the seller has the option to either A, we're going to meet all the requirements that you submitted. We're going to agree that you can take the buyer to accept the property. Or we can agree that the buyer will go ahead and accept the property without you fixing anything, or we'll take a monetary adjustment at closing instead of you fixing stuff for us. And that's all part of the inspection notice, and we'll hit that here in a minute. So, again, just to rehash this really shortly. Get a contract on a property. We've hopefully written 15 days to do our inspection notice in there. Inspector comes back and says, get the roof checked. So we exercise our additional 5 days by simply just sending an email to the other agent and putting them on notice that we are exercising our additional 5 days. So in that 20-day time period, we have written out our inspection notice with the requests that we have 10 days to get on the same page about what they're going to fix, what they're not going to fix, or they're going to give me money at closing instead.
So if you had that one thing that was like, if you wanted to add that $500 limitation in the special agreements, and you would be looking at your inspection list and probably weighing which ones you want to ask for to have done, or?
My hope would be that, well, here's how I would act. Let me back up. I want you to look at your inspection report and satisfy your client.
Right.
So if they're concerned about, and again, to me, big items are better. Talk them off the ledge on getting every outlet replaced,
exactly.
Some of those things, because they can do those things once they're in. Bigger ticket items, I always ask for.
Right.
Or things that they're really concerned about. You know, it may be a little issue, there may be a little bit of mold in the bathroom, but that may freak out your client. Ask for that. And then if the lender comes back and asks for other things, we'll deal with that later. I don't want you thinking about the lender and what they may or may not ask for at all. I want you to make your client happy with this inspection notice. Hopefully we can get on the same page with the seller. And then if the lender comes back and wants something later, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Because if they've already agreed to it, they've already agreed to it. I see where you're going with this, that, okay, now I've already agreed to $2,500 plus $500 of lender required repairs, plus maybe a home warranty. So now I'm $4,000 out, and now you're asking me for another $3,000 of inspections. I appreciate that you may want to weigh that a little bit, right. But I also don't want you limiting, making your client satisfied with that inspection report, banking, no pun intended, on what the lender might do. Okay? Because at the end of the day, either the seller is going to do what we want them to do, or your buyer is going to take the property as it says, or we're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And that's money, as big of an issue as it is. That's the simple thing about how this is all going to work. We're either going to get on the same page or we're not. And so therefore, I don't want my client feeling like they're shortchanged before they ever get to the closing table. And sometimes they will feel that way, but I don't want to limit that in my inspection notice. And if you've got if you've got one of those clients that wants 27 things, by all means fill it out, and I want you to pick up the phone, and I want you to call the other agent and say, I tried to talk them off the ledge on a couple of these things. They're really hard and fast on these. I apologize for the really long inspection notice. Please see what you can do and let me know. That way, when they get it, they're not like, what? That way, they're already prepared. You've kind of given them the soft blow, and they can get prepared for what they're going to say to their clients. And hopefully, they're not mad when they present your inspection notice to the client. Okay? So again, if you've got an investor that's just going to take the property, they can check this waiver box right here. Section E, again, you can ignore because we're not municipalities and government stuff. Excuse me, not really an issue here. Broker's role, you can read this to your client if you want. It shows all the things that we're going to do. And things that we will help them with, and things that we are required by law to do. It's all a bunch of attorney writing, so I don't want to read it. I do want to read this down here to you, though. Under Missouri law, brokers are immune from liability for statements made by engineers, land surveys, geologists, environmental, wood destroying, control experts, termite, mortgage. So whatever any of these other people say to our client, if it's wrong, we are immune from liability of that situation, provided we didn't employ that person. The person's not employed by us. So if you got an admin that makes a statement that causes trouble, or you make a statement that causes trouble, then you are liable. Provided that we didn't hire that person for the client, or also in other loose terms, provided we didn't tell the client this is the only inspector you can use, or the only lender you can use, or the only title company you can use. Provide them with 3. You're welcome to say, I work with Titan Title a lot. I have great experience with them. Here's a couple others. You just tell me what you want. Most often, they're going to go with what you say, but don't only give them one choice because then this comes into play. Or if you knew the information was false prior to closing. So let's say you have a house, for whatever reason, you know that there is a giant crack in the foundation. How you know this, it doesn't matter. You know there's a giant crack in the foundation. But it's kind of hidden behind this paneled wall. But you know it's there. So client can't see it, inspector doesn't find it, they go and they close. 2 months later the house falls down and it's found out that you knew there was a giant crack in that foundation, then you are liable. So again, just disclose what you know. It's an easy thing. I had one the other day that somebody called and said, well, this happened in the basement. And I said, well, here's your answer. You have to tell them, well, either you can disclose it or I can, because I have to by law. I now have to, that I have knowledge of that, I have to tell the people that. Things you don't have to disclose are suicides in a house, murders in a house. Don't have to know about that. Yes?
What about if somebody died in the house while on Viagra?
Doesn't matter why they.
I don't care how they died.
Okay, I was just double checking on that. That's one of the things I thought I had to disclose.
Nope.
I found out from the neighbor.
No. Because I found out from the neighbor one time that, well, it was on an REO property that they said, they get that wall painted in the living room? I don't know, it's white. Well, it was all red from that boy's blood. Somebody gone in and shot their husband in the head or something, but those, I don't have to tell anybody that. So, and the answer to that question is, do you know if anybody had been murdered in this house? Whether or not I have knowledge of that, I don't have to disclose that. If you're interested in that information, you can certainly go research that. Which just sounds like a very evasive response, but you guys are not responsible or liable to know that information or report that information. Okay?
And that's just on like a murder-suicide.
Mm-hmm. And if you have questions about most of that, yeah.
Any death
Any
in the
death.
home.
Any death.
Yeah. But, for example, if you knew that your client was concerned about sexual offenders, it is not your responsibility to disclose that the neighbor next door is a sexual offender, even if you know it. However, good agents, I would encourage you to tell your client that information. It's not required, but I don't particularly want to be on the receiving end of that phone call that says, this is Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and Sarah knew that this guy was living next door and I was moving my kids in, and she made me write 0 on that section, so we didn't have any time to review it. Now I got to buy this house and live next door to this pervert. Oh, first of all, it's not Sarah's responsibility to tell you that. Now, if she knew that, then I'm going to have a very stern conversation with her, but it's not our obligation to divulge that information. That is actually on you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer or seller, actually in this case it'd be buyer, to find out that information. Okay? So we're immune as long as we didn't have any knowledge or introduce or, were the direct result of that. So that's good for us. Home warranty. Separate section, buyer acknowledges seller is not providing one. They are going to provide one up to this amount, or there's one already in play, and there's the information about it. You'll be able to see that on the MLS. Now, if there's not one being provided on the MLS, something again to keep in mind. So we've got our $2,500 closing costs. We've got that section 6 of title, which most likely your client's going to be doing C, so your seller's going to be paying for the search. And then they're going to have, if we're doing this home warranty, depending on what the price is on that, let's go back to, if we've done the $500 of lender required repairs, they could have that much. And on here, you can write an actual amount, or you can write, what was I going to say there? C section 21, which is the writers. Because then you can actually attach the home warranty application. And the reason you do that, let me back up. If it's just the standard basic $495, home warranty, you can put that in here because people are going to know what that is. If you start doing upgrades on it and the price starts going up, they may not know what that's for. So I would put C section 21, and then you can just attach that home warranty application as a writer. Which I would probably attach it as a writer anyway, but if it's specific, if it's a different price tag, then I would put it up in there. If there's any information in the MLS about their current one, you can write that in there. So again, this is a conversation to have with your seller, because now if we're paying for a $500 home warranty, well now we're, $3,500, $4,000 out of pocket off this 100 before we've ever paid commissions or done anything. Which I'm saying is not a bad thing, but you just need to make sure your seller's clear on all that, because you don't want them thinking that they're paying, say $6,000 off this, get 94, and they're essentially walking with 94. No, because after you pay all this, you're walking with about 90. So just make sure you're having those real conversations with your seller about the real money that they're going to be making.
Traditionally, is that something that you include with the, is it standard that you would fill that in?
A home warranty?
Yeah.
It just depends.
Okay. Depends on the conversation you have with your buyers, I guess.
Absolutely. And if it's a first-time home buyer, honestly, I ask for it every time. If they're not offering it, I ask for it. If they say no, I've already had that conversation with my buyer that this is your first house. There's going to be stuff you're not going to know what to do with. So if they don't do it, I want you guys to budget $500 to buy this warranty. Because I think it's real important for first-time home buyers to have that.
Definitely.
If somebody's lived in a house, you got an old guy that's pretty handy, that's not going to mean anything to him. So it's more of a client-by-client scenario. But absolutely, I ask for them just because I think it's a good add-on.
Yeah.
And I usually encourage my sellers to offer it because I also say, let's offer it. And if it gets down to the point where it's a negotiation factor, we can always take it away. They won't like it, but we can always pull that $500 back out if we need to. Yes?
So the 2,500, let's say, was the concession that we're looking at. Section 6C was the title search.
Yep.
And what was
The 500 is if we knew we were doing a government loan, and I've asked for up to $500 in lender required repairs.
lender required repairs?
Which they may not even end up spending that 500. That may not even come into play because we may have already fixed those items in our inspection.
Yeah, I just went to category lender required repairs. And then that last one was the home warranty.
Home warranty. And then also keep in mind underneath this, on top of that, are any inspection requests that were made.
Okay.
So if they end up spending $1,000 in inspections, then that, again, I think it's real important to have those real conversations early on.
Exactly.
Because it keeps you guys out of the grease later when they're like, I thought I was making 94 and you're telling me making 89 out of this deal?
Yeah.
So it softens the blow a lot later on if you just go ahead and have it. Sometimes they're not fun conversations, but better to have it now than have it later.
And you are required to offer a home warranty for our
Correct.
insurance.
We've got to offer one either way. So they're going to have to sign the waiver if they don't want one. Disposition of earnest money, I'm going to read that to you because it's a bunch of attorney lingo that says, if we've got earnest money and there's a dispute, this is how we deal with it. It goes to the state, goes to arbitration, goes back and forth, and maybe somebody will get it or maybe somebody won't. So, that's the short version of all of that. And that's the reason, honestly, I never offer it just because if it doesn't go well, this part doesn't go well either. getting that money back a lot of times is really difficult. Lost condemnation, so we've got a contract on the property, whether we've done inspections or not, doesn't really matter. Lightning strikes the house and burns the top floor down. This talks about what do we do about that. Seller can either choose to fix and repair those items based on their insurance category. They can choose to fix and repair those items all by themselves. They can choose to let the buyer out of the contract. Buyer can request to be out of the contract, or seller may provide a concession at closing in lieu of repairs. Again, a bunch of attorney mumbo jumbo in here. Hopefully we never have to talk about Section 9. Hopefully you never call me and say, Don, lightning struck the house last night, what do I do? But if and when that happens, then this is how we deal with it. So they are covered. Essentially what it says is your buyer is covered if something happens to the property catastrophically. They will not be obligated to buy the property because obviously it is no longer in its current or in the state of repair that it was before.
Let's see, I think we had that not too long ago. Didn't Gina have one that burned down recently?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's all that. Adjustments, closing costs, we touched on that a little while ago. These are the things that the buyer is responsible to pay for at closing, seller responsible to pay for at closing, and the items that we're going to split. Real important to notice here, okay, seller has agreed to pay $2,500 in closing costs. You guys are all new and don't have admins yet, so may not have an admin fee. If ultimately you're providing or charging your clients a contract processing fee, an admin fee, whatever you call it in your world. So on your buyer's agency agreement, you've got commission to be X% plus $150. Okay. This says right here that this seller concession will pay for everything that's going on in this transaction for the buyer except for any fees that you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, have agreed to pay directly to your client or to your agent as part of their administrative, which would be that $150 or $250 or whatever. So it would, your client would be responsible for paying you that directly. It would not come out of this concessions. Also, and this is really good because page 1, okay, what does that $2,500 mean? All right, well, let's go to section 10. Here's what they pay for. Here's what you pay for. Here's what you split. Oh, and by the way, all of that is not to include the cost of the home warranty, title fees, home warranty, title fees, and any brokerage transaction fees. Which is why I wrote all these out separate, because this does not include any of these things. And this one you won't see very often. Unless you're doing a government finance loan, you won't see that. And so these will be the three: the concessions, the Section 6 stuff, and the home warranty if you've got one. Okay?
Was the 500 you waived for like VA loans?
Yes, the one I moved away here, yeah. I put that in there, FHA or VA loans. A lot of times the lenders want a couple of things fixed, and this contract nor the financing addenda allow for the seller to pay for that. So we have to write that in specifically.
It's all I've ever done so far for VA loans.
Well, this one I will encourage you, I think you came in right after this, I would encourage you under special agreements, if you're doing a government loan, to write seller to provide up to whatever that number is. I think 500 is a pretty fair number, $500 of lender required repairs.
And I don't know if you figured this out by now, but our agent knew with our VA loan that safety was going to be one of the main things. Does that sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
So they knew right away from the get-go, when we were even just looking at the house, that we have 3 porches and 2 of them didn't have railing.
No railing, yep.
And I think it's 3 feet or above needs it. So that was great from the beginning. We knew already that was going to be discussed. So she knew going into it, okay, we should put a little bit more maybe for those things, right? Because, and anyway, so safety I've heard is a really big deal for VA loans.
Safety is, and FHA's loosened up a little bit, but again, if there's a little bit of chipping paint on this, that you're going to want done. So yeah, it's just if you're doing a government, that's where I would put that in.
Could you say the phrase again for me?
Seller to provide up to whatever amount of lender required repairs. Okay, section 11, once we sign this, everybody's bound to this contract. Once we sign this, we also agreed that either party can do a 1031 exchange. So if there's extra paperwork involved with that process, by signing this contract and not marking out this paragraph, we've already agreed to be participants in that, whether the buyer or the seller. So I don't think most of the time you're going to know it's a 1031 when you're getting this, but this is just to tell your client, if they change their mind and sell their property and now it's 1031, we've already agreed to do whatever, jump through whatever hoops they want. The entire agreement, contract not be changed unless it's initialed or signed by all parties. So once this is signed, this is the end all be all, unless we do write an amendment or we change it in any way. All right, default and remedies. This is another section that hopefully we will never talk about, but I would almost guarantee you that we will. So, contract's good, inspection's done, survey's done if we did one, everybody's on the same page, and buyer decides, I'm out. Or actually, seller defaults. We'll do seller first, sorry. Seller defaults. Seller decides, you know what, that job, wherever I was going to go, doesn't seem that great. My kids love this house, we love this wherever, whatever. We're not moving. Okay, so what are the options that the buyer has when that happens? Buyer may specifically enforce this contract and recover damages suffered by buyer as a result of the delay of the acquisition of the property. So, buyer can go pursue an attorney and essentially sue the seller to sell the house to us. And whatever expenses I incur during that time period, seller is also going to pay for. That's one. Two, buyer can terminate the contract by notice to the seller and they'll get their earnest money back. Or three, buyer may pursue any other damages or remedy allowable or available at law or in equity. What does that mean? What does that attorney mean? That means they can sue you for whatever they want. Now, chances of them getting over 10 or 15% on a real estate contract are pretty slim, but there is no limitation in this contract for what they could sue for. So that's real important to know. So, and the other thing is, up here, the seller's defaulted and the buyer's decided to terminate the contract. The buyer is entitled to earnest money back. The buyer is entitled to their inspection fees back and any survey fees. Any fees that the buyer incurred as a result of this contract, and now the seller is walking away, the seller is responsible to pay for those items. So again, put your listing hat on, and we're having this conversation. Okay, I understand you've changed your mind, but we need to talk real about what could happen to you. A, they can enforce the contract and force you to sell. If they choose to let you out, you're still going to have to write them a pretty hefty check because of the expenses that they've already incurred. And then three, whether they do one or two, they can still sue you for whatever they want to. These are not mutually exclusive. These can occur simultaneously. So keep that in mind. That's just a real good conversation to have. So buyer gets back any expenses they have. Buyer defaults, same options. Seller can pursue the contract, seller can let them out, or seller can sue for whatever they want to. But if the seller lets them out, seller's entitled to earnest money and that's it. So, I was telling you earlier, I don't offer it unless it's asked for. I would tell you, perhaps on a listing, maybe to go ahead and ask for it if you get a contract. That way you've got at least something, if something goes south, to hook them in a little bit. But again, that's up to you and your client how you feel about that. Okay?
So on the buyer's side, they would only lose their earnest money?
If the buyer defaults, the seller is only entitled to the buyer's earnest money.
And that's it?
That's it. Or, but again, the seller can still sue them, and the seller can still pursue to make them buy the house. But if they just let them out of the contract, the only thing that they are entitled to is the earnest money.
Okay.
All right. Also, during here, 14, this is section 14, prevailing party. So if we do get to the point where we're suing and one party wins, that party also wins any of their expenses that were involved in getting to that point. So they can be out more money there too. Seller's disclosure statement. Either we got it, we want it, or there isn't one. Honestly, I would encourage you, if at all possible, to always have the seller's disclosure statement in your hands before you make an offer. Even if they've checked the box that says they don't know anything, I would rather you have that in your hands than be waiting on it. Because, A, it's taken up time, and these time frames are not exclusive from your inspection time frames. They're all running simultaneous. So, and as a seller, I would rather have those up front, because what this states in section B is that, okay, we get a contract, I provided the buyer with these seller's disclosures, And now the seller can come back to me and say, oh, we're terminating the contract because we don't like what you wrote in the seller's disclosures. So again, another kind of get out of jail free card if I, the seller, haven't done my job up front and gone ahead and put these on. So listing agents, make sure you're attaching these to your contract, to your listing agreement.
I was gonna say, I've seen them pretty much for every house I've looked at except for one, so it kind of surprises me that people don't have that before the listing goes out.
And you're technically supposed to, but sometimes it doesn't happen, or they don't get attached, or they don't get put on the MLS or whatever. But if you've got one that doesn't have it on there, I would just call the agent and say, hey, I don't see disclosures. Can you send those to me? I'm getting ready to write an offer. And that way, even if they don't have them, hopefully they'll get them written, and you can get them back.
The people who usually don't answer the disclosures, except for the first few ones, are they ones that sometimes inherit the properties?
Often, yeah. And if you know, and I would also, it's one of those, depends on how hard-nosed you want to be. I've had a couple, I've done this over the years, where I know the person that is selling the property has lived in the property for 10 years. You know, it's not like grandma lived in the house and they didn't know what was going on because they were in another state. You have physically lived in this property. Please fill out the disclosures appropriately, because you do have more knowledge than what you're telling me. You know, if you don't know about the plumbing, that's fine, but you have to know more things than you're actually telling me. So, signatures, everything's going to be good. We also, this brings into the fact, the Missouri Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, which says if we sign electronically, it's all good. So same thing back to our, if we have to exercise our additional 5 days for our specialist report, our electronic notice to the agent is the same thing as if we wrote them a nice long letter and mailed it, or took it over their hand. As long as they have received it, that is good as far as notice is concerned. Governing law, don't break laws. Seller, buyer, naming, plural, masculine. Again, this is kind of legalese, attorney stuff. Notices. Notice to the agent is notice to the client. This is specifically important when you are receiving documentation, because time frames start kicking pretty immediately. But notice to you is notice to your client, which means you need to notify your client as soon as you know something. And we also have reason to hold that same expectation of the other agent, that when we notify them with this contract, that they are immediately notifying their client. So not to say that you need to be pests and call them back in 6 hours and find out what's going on, but you can reasonably expect that they should have provided that to their client in a timely time frame. Anyway. Yeah, another note on that. Notice agents, notice to the party. Riders. Again, if we're doing government finance loan, any of those things, if you wanted to do an HSA home warranty, you can check the box and put HSA home warranty. If, I don't know really what else you would have specifically, but anything else that you've got to add that's an actual document, you can write it in here, and you can either write this whole thing, or you can just write MSC 222R. That's sufficient. You don't have to write out the title, because they're all referenced at the bottom of the page.
Well, and septic will go in there.
Yes. Well and septic reports, yes.
I realized in one of my contracts, I put the 455 on that one place for the HSA and had it attached, but I did not do the check.
You don't have to do that. I would just encourage you to do that. That way it's very clear about what home warranty you and your clients are expecting, and it becomes part of the contract that way.
They never responded to that and sent everything back except for that signed, so that's why I was double checking.
Yeah, well, and if you asked for it in the contract and they signed the contract and did not dispute it, they have agreed to it.
Okay, I wasn't sure since they didn't sign the actual application.
I would just call the other agent and ask them and say, hey, you did not remove this in your counteroffer, so therefore, by default, you've accepted it. I just need that signed version back. If you guys accept it, however you want to present it, but yeah, if they don't specifically take it out in an addendum, it's still part of the original.
Would you mind quickly going over the difference of between the contingencies here, the sale and the closing? Would you do both of them then, if you were waiting on that? Does that make sense?
Contingency for buyers, property, contingency for sale of existing property. Yes, if you've got a situation where the buyer's got to have their money from their house to be able to buy this next one, then yeah, you're absolutely going to want to touch that.
If I know I'm going to be working with my parents as soon as I do get my license, would it be better just to wait then if they don't necessarily have a house that they're in love with? Should I just wait till their house sells?
It's entirely up to your situation. If they have a place to go and they can do those kinds of things, then honestly, my gut answer is yes. But it's much better. a much better offer presentation when that's not part of it.
That makes sense.
But I will also tell you, if you've got buyers that that's the only way they can do it, then ask for it.
Okay.
You're gonna have, and you will get more rejections as a result of that, and just prep your client for that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there's not somebody out there that, you know, their house is on the market, they had a contract on it, it fell apart, now it's been on the market for 3 more months.
Yeah.
You know what? Something's better than nothing. I'll take yours. If I get a better deal, then we'll talk. But if I don't get a better deal, we'll sell it to you.
But you do fill out both of those then? The sale and the closing?
Yeah, people's done that.
Yeah, I'm missing what the difference would be.
What the
there.
difference is.
The sale is I have to get a contract on my house. The closing is I have to get the money from my house in order to buy yours.
Okay.
So if somebody just doesn't want to have 2 house payments and 2 places to live, but they can still buy your house without selling this house, they would have contingent upon the sale of their house. If I can't buy your house unless I get the money and proceeds from mine, then it's contingent upon the closing of my property. Got it?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So any other riders? Right here also, please note this contract is for use in connection with completed construction. So what does that mean, completed construction? Well, obviously anything that's out here that's already been built, it's a resale. But if it's a new home construction and it's out of the ground, it's painted, it doesn't even have to be painted. It's out of the ground, appliances are in, those kinds of things. If you're down to picking the little stuff, like maybe carpet or maybe appliances or maybe paint in a room or 2, that can be considered completed construction. If you're having to deal with, you know, design, layout, it's not out of the ground yet, you're going to want to use the builder's contract because there are several time frames and deadlines as far as monies being distributed, things being completed, checklists being done. So when in doubt, use the contract or the builder's contract. But if it's pretty well done, you know, maybe the yard's not in or minor things like that, you can use this one for that. But just note that if you've got specific things that you need to ask for, like switch plate covers to be installed, doorknobs to be completed, you know, little things that may not be done, you're going to want to put that down here in the special agreement section. And that's the reason that you use the builder's contract if it's not that far along, because we don't want to have a list of 50 things down here that we're expecting the builder to do as part of this contract because it's not built for that. Okay? If it's, again, if it's little minor things, it's a relationship down here. Immediate family member, mom and dad, or parents, or whatever. Okay? If you're buying the house, then you're a party to the transaction. If you got ownership or anything like that. Sources of compensation. Most often, you're going to have this seller box checked because the seller has offered on the MLS to pay a buyer's agency fee of X. Unless we go back to that buyer's agency fee that you've chosen to charge your clients $150, $200. Okay, well, I'm receiving my commission from the seller and $150 from the buyer, so therefore I've got to check both of those boxes. Most often, again, especially new, you guys, it's just going to be seller. But if you start charging that transaction fee, you've got to check both those boxes because your compensation is coming from both sides of the transaction. Broker's relationship. You guys are going to be a buyer or a seller or a dual limited agent. You could be transaction broker. I'm going to encourage you not to do that. Sub-agent, most often you're going to run into that. And you will be a designated agent. And I'll cover this here just when I'll go through the employment agreement and show you the difference. Because the employment agreement hires Keller Williams, and then we designate you as the agent to work for that client. So, your information here, firm name, etc., etc. Again, seller on this side, buyer on this side. If we're part of a franchise, we don't represent the entire body. Any sales information that's wrong or any sales information we're going to report unless the client tells us not to. We're not using any foreign money without going through the proper channels. Don't sell to terrorists. Acceptance of deadline. I get asked this question a lot. Do you put a deadline or do you not put a deadline? This is a case-by-case scenario too, because if it's important to your client that they know by Friday, because if not, we're going back out Saturday to look at other stuff, put it in there. If your client's kind of loose, that, you know, if we find out in the next week or so, that's fine, leave it blank. You don't have to have a deadline. The thing that I honestly don't like about deadlines is, especially with clients that may be out of town or, you know, it's first of school, whatever excuse you want, if I put a deadline of tomorrow night and for whatever reason the clients can't get together with the agent until Wednesday morning, I may have shot myself in the foot because the agent can't present the offer in a manner that might be able to get me the deal. So use those sparingly, but by all means use them, because they are important. If it's important to your client, it becomes important in the contract. Yes?
If you don't put the deadline though, it could be a couple weeks later, couldn't it bite you in the butt in that regard?
If you're concerned about that at all, I would just send the agent a notice that says the offer I submitted to you on 8/18/2018 is herefore withdrawn. That we're making an offer on another property, please consider that offer withdrawn. You've given them notice, and you're fine.
Wasn't sure, I was thinking they'd go on.
I get your point, yes. Because that's what I tell people about, if you've got investors that are doing that they're willing to offer, they're only offering 50 no matter what the property looks like, make that offer and just tell the agent, if and when they're ready to sell this to me, let me know. And if we decide we don't want it, I'll let you know. They just leave it open. So
you can actually so the email is like, if they decide that, okay, there's 24 hours and they find another house, as long as it's not signed, they can still withdraw.
Absolutely.
You could use that withdraw.
absolutely. If seller accepts this, they sign here. So until this is signed here, or I've got some kind of counteroffer initiative here,
Right.
I've just made an offer. I can take my offer away from you at any point unless you've agreed to it.
And you just have to send an email, there's no other.
I'll look for it here in a second. There is a form that you can use, but yes, notice to the agents, notice to the client. You can just send an email that says, we withdraw our offer. We found something else.
You ever had people like that withdraw it and then like the other side kind of fakes the signature, said we signed it before then?
Yeah.
I was just curious.
But the defense that we had was, that's great that you got those signatures on Friday night. You didn't notify me, the agent, until Saturday at noon, and my recension letter came to you Friday at 5 o'clock. So it's not on me that you didn't provide me timely notice. If you would have provided that to me by 5 o'clock on Friday, we would have been doing right ahead. But you did not do that, and if we write out the time frame of how things occurred, it doesn't matter when you got the signature on the contract. You didn't provide that to me to provide to my client. Which is why it's really important, again, notice to the agents, notice to the client. It's real important that you guys are making sure that you get those notices done, because that's more what can come back and bite you in the butt, is the other agent holding your feet to the fire. Okay? So buyers signing their signatures and dates here. Again, if seller accepts everything above as it is, they sign here. If they don't, they'll either reject it or they'll counteroffer it. And again, down here is your earnest money thing. So, let's assume, what do you guys have next to your packet? You've got disclosure, but I want to look